the I think we've got 4 of the 5 here, so that's great. We will then go ahead and call this September 8th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order. It is 7 o'clock. With that, can we please have roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Donaldson.
Here.
Commissioner McLeod.
Here.
Commissioner Moman.
Here.
And Chair Waddy.
Here. Thank you. Moving on our agenda, item 3, ex parte communications. Do any commissioners have any ex parte communications to disclose this evening?
No.
Nope. Okay, seeing none, we'll move right along. Item 4 on our calendar is the consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine and will be enacted on by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the commission. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a member of the commission or a member of the public wishes to remove an item from the consent calendar. We have 2 consent calendar items this evening. First up, we have planning application 21-052, design review for a 2-level addition at 1467 Portland. And item 4B, planning application 21-060, design review for a 2nd-story addition at 915 Taylor. Yes,
with regard to 1467 Portland, the story poles were installed incorrectly on the site. So the applicant has asked that the matter be continued to the next planning commission meeting so that they can correct the installation to be in compliance, for accurately demonstrating the building height.
Okay, so maybe if we can take that item as a continuance item on the consent calendar to date specific, September, is that 22nd is the next
22nd,
hearing. So that would be the action on the consent calendar, and item 4B would be adoption of that item as drafted. With that minor change, do any commissioners wish to pull either of these items off the consent calendar?
No.
Okay.
Well, I have some issues with the 1467 Portland Avenue project, but
I think for right now, it's just the act of continuance for the moment.
I think we'll just have to continue it, and then, I'll make my comments at the next hearing.
Okay, perfect. So keeping those 2 on the consent calendar for now, why don't we go ahead and open it up for public comment on those 2 items? Planning staff, do we have any members of the audience who wish to speak on either or pull either of these items off the consent calendar?
Just saw a hand raised for the architect of the 1467 Portland project. He is wishing to speak.
Okay, and is this on the continuance at this point? Do you think we should pull that off, or maybe?
I think we're okay to pull it off since it is publicly noticed. Anyone is welcome to comment on it.
Okay.
And perhaps he wants to provide an explanation to the commission on the story pole installation.
Okay, sure. Why don't we just go ahead and take that public comment then on 1467 before we take a vote on these items.
Okay. All right. Gary, you should.
Hi.
Okay.
Hi. I was just thinking that since people are here attending the meeting virtually, and it is totally appropriate to continue because the story poles are completely wrong. But it would be nice to hear the comments so that maybe we can use the time in between now and the next meeting to come up with responses to whatever comments you guys want to make.
Okay, so then in that case, you'd like to have this pulled off the consent calendar and have this item heard as a.
Yeah, it sounds like people have thoughts, so it would be fun to do that, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, why don't we go ahead and see if there are any other speakers in public comment, and then we can turn it back to the commission and discuss with staff.
Great.
Staff, are there any other? It looks like there may be one other hand. I can't really see the hands right now.
We have one other speaker, Brooke Malik. Unfortunately, I cannot grant her the ability to speak right now. So, and
hello.
Yes. Hi, Brooke.
Hi. Sorry for the baby in the background. I was under the impression that a project at my property at 1110 Pomona was on the agenda for today, but I'm not hearing about it.
It is.
It is.
It
It's,
is. We are currently on the consent calendar right now. So we're not yet on that item.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Sure. So this is last call for folks who would like to comment on the consent calendar or pull items off the consent calendar. So this is the last call. Seeing no other hands being raised, we'll go ahead and close public comment, turn it back to the commission on this. And staff, I would defer to you on how you'd like us to handle sorry, my agenda just scrolled down, the Portland Avenue item of whether we should pull it off and discuss tonight. I know we've got several items on the agenda, or whether we should have that discussion at next hearing.
I think it's okay to go ahead and provide the applicant some of the concerns or clarifications that the commission would like to have addressed. Just because when we do come back in 2 weeks, there may be some revisions that might negate a second continuance.
Okay, then maybe for the sake of efficiency here, we'll just open it up. Commissioner McLeod, if you had some comments on Portland, go ahead and share those, and then we will call one roll call vote with both a continuance to date specific and then adoption of the subsequent item.
Yeah, I guess, there are a couple things. One is the second parking space, which to me, it looks like you have to drive through the garage to get to it, which just, to my mind, seems totally impracticable. And, it doesn't seem like a reasonable second parking space. So that, for me, is almost a non-starter. I don't know what the applicants are intending with that, but it sure doesn't look like it's going to work. So I would object to that. Moving the garage to the back corner and having the parking space in front of the garage would seem like a better alternative. And then my other problem or my other issues, there's many things I like about the project. They've done a good job at kind of interlocking spatially all the new spaces in a somewhat complicated way. But the other thing that I'm having trouble with is the west elevation, where the house is kind of the addition is kind of a big block, kind of stuck onto the existing house. And I don't really see that it's a very attractive design, and it's a pretty long street facade on that side. So if the architect can come back with maybe some perspective drawings of that, or model views to help us understand it. I just don't see it as relating very well to the existing house. Trying to use some of the elements, but not in the same way. And it just looks kind of too blocky and massive, stuck onto the front part of the house, which has the truncated roof of the existing house. So basically, my two big concerns are the west elevation and the second parking spot. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Great, thank you. Were there any, Commissioner Donaldson?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I wasn't very bothered about the parking arrangement. I hear what you're saying, Ian, maybe move the garage to the back and have the space in front. I just saw it as kind of a tandem, an unusual, I agree, tandem parking space. And that, my thinking was, well, the most frequently used car would be in the garage, and the hobby car or the second car, whatever, would be in the other parking space. And if there wasn't a car there, then it'd be part of the backyard and add to the open space. So I wasn't terribly bothered by that, although I do admit it is unusual. I generally like the project. I think it's a really unusual designed house with the storybook kind of roofs, and find it very attractive, actually, the house. My concerns were at first were the south facade looking from Portland Avenue onto the site, but the story poles revealed to me that the addition would hardly be visible at all from Portland. So that alleviated that, unless the story poles are wrong and change. And I did have some concerns about that west elevation. I agree, in a sense. I was a little bit bothered by sort of vertical, purely vertical wall right in the middle, where which would be the south wall of the addition. It looked a little bit awkward to me, but I don't have any good suggestions as to how that might be modified in a way. Basically, I thought the architect did a pretty nice job of trying to replicate the roof pitches and the details of the design so that the new addition fit in with the building. But if there's some better ways to do it and make it a little bit more visually attractive and a little less, can I say, obvious as an addition, then I think that would be fine with me. And maybe there is some ways to improve that. So I think those are my comments. Yeah.
Well, the story poles are about 4 or 5 feet too low. So what you're seeing with the story poles from Portland, it's not really accurate. So,
okay.
Maybe when they get them corrected, then could have another look at that.
It would be good to look at them again with that in mind. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If that wraps the comments up for the applicant on Portland, why don't we then go ahead and if there is somebody who'd like to make a motion on the consent calendar, again, this is to continue item 4A to September 22nd and approval of item 4B as proposed.
Certainly. I could move approval of the consent calendar and we will be approving 915 Taylor Street, planning application 21060. And we will be continuing 57 Portland Avenue to the next meeting on September 22nd.
Great. Do we have a second on that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, seconded. Then on that motion and second, Commissioner Momin.
I would vote yes for continuance of 21052, and I would recuse from voting on 915 Taylor Street.
Okay. Commissioner McLeod?
Yes, I'll vote yes on all accounts.
Commissioner Donaldson?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So item 4A is continued 4-0, and item 4B is approved 3 yes and 1 recusal, which is our quorum for the evening. Great. With that, we will go ahead and move along on our agenda. Item 5 is up next, announcements and communications, of which there are none.
We actually, sorry, Commissioner, we have just one quick.
Oh, sure. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So the commission might have noticed in the email that we sent out that we've switched to a new software for uploading the agenda and supporting documents for future commission hearings. So I'm just going to do a really quick tutorial to show you. You guys may know what is happening, but I'm going to do a quick tutorial to show you how to access the features in a more convenient way, hopefully.
Cool.
And then let's see, we can go ahead and, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So when one approaches the city's main page, you would go down to the lower right-hand corner, click on meeting agendas. This is where you'll find all upcoming meetings and commission hearings. And then right here, you'll see that the Planning and Zoning Commission is going on live right now. If you click on the HTML packet link right here, that brings you to a more familiar agenda packet that you're used to seeing. The only difference now is that the supporting documents are not collapsed, or are collapsed rather. And so if you click on the items itself, for example, item 4A here, you can see the attachments below. This is also where any public correspondences we receive will also be uploaded. And then if you click on the little eyeball icon here, you would see a preview of the documents. And once this opens up, there's actually a feature that allows you to annotate the documents, which is new for us as a city. And there's other upcoming features that are going to be available in the near future, which we will inform you about. If you do, one quick note that we were told to inform you about is that if you do annotate these documents in the future, they are subject to public information requests. So keep that in mind. And then lastly, if you click on the little cloud icon with the down arrow that will download the file type directly to your device. So that's basically it. As the new features roll out and we continue working through everything, we'll let you guys know what else will be available, but bear with us as we transition into this new software and let us know if there are any questions going forward. Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Moman, did you have a question?
Sure.
Yeah, so I want to know who is able to annotate these drawings? Can anyone do that or just commissioners?
It'll just be panelists that are able to do
Just the
that.
panelists, okay.
Mhm. Yeah. And the public view is similar to this, but you just wouldn't have the annotation features included. Any other questions? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Commissioner Donaldson?
Yeah. Maybe a little bit more on annotation. So the annotation then is something where we would make notes on the file for our own benefit, or notes, and the notes would be seen by the public or would not be seen by the public, or would they be seen by other commissioners?
Yeah, that's a great question. I asked that just before the hearing. So if you were to annotate it in theory in the future, it would only be visible to you privately.
Okay.
It wouldn't be published publicly. But if a member of the public did request to see your annotated document, then that is something that we would have to provide. So.
Oh, I see. So, okay. All right. Mm-hmm.
Just a little detail there, yeah.
All right. So, all right. Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Okay, great. So, thank you.
Okay. With that, we will move on to item 6 on our agenda, which is general public comment. General public comment is for folks who wish to address the commission. And I'll just note, I think the agenda has a typo here and says the city council instead of the commission. But if anyone in the public wishes to address the commission on an item that's not on the agenda, now is your opportunity to speak. Please note that you have up to 3 minutes to speak. And again, this is for providing public comment on items that are not otherwise on today's agenda. And with that, it looks like there is one person with their hand raised during general public comment. And then Commissioner Donaldson, I see you've got your hand up still. Oh, is that unintentional? Oh, okay, perfect. Then why don't we go ahead and open it up for general public comment?
Yes, Sangi Stresta, you have your hand raised. We're going to allow you to talk.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon. Good evening, ma'am. I'm Sangi Stresta. I'm the owner of 915 Taylor Street. I joined the meeting, but I wasn't sure whether you discussed 915 or what the decision was on 915, the addition. I'm sorry.
Yes, we approved that item under the consent calendar.
Oh, great. Do you want me to stay on for the meeting or am I done?
No need. Your item's been approved.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
Thank you. All right. Last call for any other members of the public who wish to speak during general public comment. All right. Seeing no hands raised, we will go ahead and close general public comment and move along on our agenda to item 7, discussion and possible action on or action items this evening. We have several items. First up, we have item 7A. This is planning application 21-056, design review and parking reduction for a single story addition at 1110 Pomona. With that, I'll turn it over to staff for a presentation.
Yes, thank you. One moment. Good evening, everyone. Once again, this is planning application 21056, design review and parking reduction for a single story addition at 1110 Pomona Avenue. Some background on the property. The subject property is a 5,460 square foot lot with a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 1,362 square foot home built in 1946. City records show minor work done to the property in the past. Here's a street view of the property as it sits today. And project request. The applicant is seeking design review approval for a 219 square foot single story addition on the south side of the home, and also a parking reduction to eliminate one off-street parking space to accommodate the proposed project design. Here's an existing elevation of the home, and this is the front facade. And here's the proposed front facade. As you can see on the left side of the diagram, the addition juts out this way south and encroaches into the existing driveway area. Analysis. The applicant is proposing a 219 square foot addition on the south side of the home. The project scope includes expanding and remodeling the dining room, kitchen areas, while also creating a third bedroom for the home, along with a closet and for the washer and dryer. This would result in a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 1,661 square foot home with a maximum height of 17 feet 5 inches. And here's just a snapshot of the proposed floor plan. As you can see, the dining room is proposed to be increased along with the kitchen area. And then this portion here establishes a new 3rd bedroom for the home. Additionally, there is a new side entrance to the into the primary dwelling on the south side of the home. Parking reduction. As far as the existing conditions for parking, there are currently 2 off-street parking spaces located in the detached garage and driveway. The existing property conditions provide compliant parking per section 2028-030 of the Albany Municipal Code. Proposed design. 1 off-street parking space is proposed to be eliminated as the addition it will encroach into the existing driveway. Approval from the Planning and Zoning Commission is required to reduce the off-street requirements from 2 spaces to 1. And just to illustrate that, the addition is shown here in the hashed portion right here of the diagram, and that encroaches into the proposed driveway, which hinders access to the rear garage, which would also then result in only a single off-street parking space at the front of the property, which is clear from the front 15-foot setback area, but does indeed eliminate one of the 2 off-street parking spaces. Staff has not received any correspondences in regard to this project proposal. The project is categorically exempt from CEQA per section 15303. And recommendation, staff recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission review and approve the project request subject to the findings and conditions of approval. And with that, staff is happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chris. Before we turn it over to the project applicant for their presentation, do any commissioners have any questions for staff? Seeing none. Okay, I actually do have a quick question for staff, and I know I've asked this before, but I couldn't find it in the staff report. Can you remind me again what the dimensions are and what the regulations are around the parking spaces in terms of how far a qualified parking space must be located out of the setback and what those dimensions are?
Yeah, so open parking spaces are required to be 8.5 feet wide by 18 in length. Parking is not permitted in the required front setback area of 15 feet. It is permitted in the side yard setback area and rear yard setback areas. For enclosed parking, such as the detached garage in the rear, it's required to be 8.5 feet wide by 19 in length. So an extra additional foot of length is required for enclosed parking spaces.
Got it. And then just one other question that I had on that, it looks, and I think we had a really analogous project not that long ago, several months ago. There's a gate in the driveway that doesn't look like it allows for vehicular access to the detached rear garage. And so I'm just wondering how we're able to count the detached garage as an existing parking space when you can't get to the detached parking garage. So right now it feels like there's in reality only one accessible parking space in the driveway. And I'm just wondering how that factors into the analysis in terms of the existing condition and how the existing condition is being, to me, it seems like it's going from 1 to 1 instead of from 2 to 1 in terms of the parking, but I was just curious how that plays into the sort of technical analysis here.
Sure. The city recognizes existing non-conforming parking spaces. So in cases where the detached garage, even if it doesn't meet the minimum dimensions, from a planning standpoint, when we look at it, we would count that as one space, and then spaces in front of it in a tandem configuration would also contribute to the parking count. So in theory, one could have, I'm not exactly sure where the existing front gate is.
It's right there, right? Yeah,
here.
Right there.
Yeah.
And it's a pedestrian only access, it looks like, instead of vehicular.
Yeah, so I mean, pragmatically, a car could obviously not park in there, but it would fit in this portion right here. So, I mean, realistically, it is one parking space that can be accommodated even with existing circumstances.
Got it. So sort of the interpretation in terms of code compliance is if there is a garage, even if you can't get to it, it counts.
Yeah.
For all extensive purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Okay.
We just add one other point is that that gate could be removed if that was, the wish of the homeowner to take it out so that they could have access. However, with how the project is designed by extending the building envelope into the side yard area, it completely eliminates that access.
Got it. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you. Commissioner McLeod, did you also have a question?
Well, just to follow up on that a little bit. Are we allowed to grant a front yard parking exception in the front setback? I mean, it's not specifically asked for in the
dimensional requirements.
Pardon?
You can if it meets the dimensional requirements. I think in this case, and Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the remaining area located in the front yard setback doesn't actually meet the minimum parking space size requirements.
Got it. Because you've got 33 feet in total, so you don't have 18 feet times 2.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's also a design issue. I mean, it's been designed to prevent that. So, so okay, anyway. Yeah, and then my next question, I guess the applicants could answer it also, is that a fence and a gate, or is it like a walking gate, and then the rest of the fence is movable there, so it allows cars to park behind it, or I don't know. I mean, so anyway, yeah, that could easily be removed. That's anyway, that was my other observation or question. That's all.
Sure. Commissioner Donaldson?
Yeah, I was puzzled a little bit by the application, and in fact, I emailed Christopher about it the other day. This project is 219 square feet, and new construction under 240 square feet doesn't, is exempt from our parking reduction ordinance. It seems to me, I'm confused by that. So it looks to me like staff must have brought this to us because of the issue it raised, and the issue being building in the driveway area and therefore eliminating the possibility of a second off-street parking space. I think I applaud staff for doing that because it is kind of a loophole in our ordinance in a sense, but also we don't need to do parking reductions for home additions that are under 240 square feet. It is another way of interpreting the ordinance, I think. Maybe staff has some comment on that, and maybe it's just not relevant.
The thinking in bringing it to the commission was that the proposed project design, for all extensive purposes, renders off-street parking potential non-compliant with what's required of the code. In theory, like we mentioned before, that fence, whether it be this property owner or the next property owner, could be removed, and 2 off-street parking spaces could be more easily accommodated, in contrast to if a built structure was proposed to encroach in the driveway. So that's kind of our thinking behind bringing that towards the commission for review.
I think that was the right call. Thank you.
Commissioner Moment, did you have a question?
No, just a follow-up comment on Commissioner McLeod's comment. Looks like I agree with him. Looks like this has been designed to, preclude possibility of second tandem parking space. The setback between the new addition and the side wall property line is over 7 feet now, and what is needed for a legal parking space is 8.5 feet. And if, as planning manager and mentioned that if the parking space is permitted in the front setback, then we need just additional 3-4 feet or 5 feet max in that zone in terms of depth. Or if the gate is slightly pushed back and the dining space is reduced a little bit by 1.5 feet, then we could easily create space for second parking space there. So with just minor adjustments, it is possible to maintain 2 spaces.
All right. If there aren't any other questions, why don't we go ahead and turn it over to the project applicant for his presentation? Then we'll open it up for public comment and turn it back for commentary by the commissioners. Um,
Okay. So we have the property owner, Brooke Malik. You have 3 minutes to speak starting now. Brooke, you're muted.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, thank you for taking the time to review this. I guess what I would say is, hey baby, you know, the whole purpose of this addition was to be able to add a bedroom, a third bedroom to this house to increase the livability of the home. We looked at a lot of different potential layouts, and ultimately the reduction of the parking that we're proposing is really all to serve the need of just trying to add a third bedroom, essentially, without to add that bedroom without pushing out the kitchen meant that we would have to have a back door through a bedroom, which we're not comfortable with. We've had an intruder in our property before that I came home to and aren't really interested in having exterior access to the home through what would be a baby's room. And that really, wanting to have that space for a baby necessitated pushing out the kitchen to have a more sensible place for an exterior door. And pushing out the kitchen kind of necessitated pushing out the adjoining dining room because there's a peak in the roof between those two rooms. So it didn't seem to make architectural sense to only push out the kitchen. You know, we are just trying to improve the livability of the home. There are obviously on my daily walks around my neighborhood, dozens of houses in in my block that only have one legal parking space, not counting the first 15 feet of the property line. And, on top of that, only dozens more that I can only assume only have one parking spot. So, we're kind of just asking to be granted some flexibility based on the precedent in the neighborhood. That being said, if there could be, an amendment made, I suppose, if there's been some kind of lack of clarity for me, I guess, in terms of the actual dimensions required for a parking space, there could be a way for us to still make these plans work with going, I believe if we were to reduce the width of the addition by about a foot, my understanding is that would still allow us to have the 2 required parking spaces. And that's something that we would be, open and amenable to. But if it became something like cutting off 3 to 4 feet, then the whole thing really doesn't make sense. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Why don't we go ahead and open it up now for general public comment? And then after general public comment, we will turn it back to the commission. So with that, if there are any members of the public who would like to speak on this item, now is your opportunity to get in the queue and raise your hand. So far, there are no speakers who are requesting to speak. So last call here, if there are any members of the public who wish to speak on this item. Going once, going twice. Oh, all right. We do have one that jumped in the queue. Looks like Nick Peterson.
Nick, you have 3 minutes to speak starting now.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to speak. This is a little unusual, but I could answer Ian's question. This happens to be my mom's former house. And I'm very excited to see that the new owners are improving it, starting a family, really settling into the community. So I applaud that. This is exactly what we hope would happen. That gate that goes across actually has 2 sections. There's a person entrance, and then you can pull a cane bolt and open it up. So I actually have gotten vehicles into the back before. But when my mom was there, really we never did any parking in the garage. The garage is kind of small, and wouldn't park back there. And having one space in the front, it's very similar to a lot of the space, the houses that are around, including my own home, where I have my only parking place actually in the setback. So I would argue in favor of this. I think it's helping a young family that's been in our community for just a few years to realize their dream, and I certainly applaud that. I don't think it. There's also a lot of at least when my mom was there, the street parking across the street and in front was really adequate and never overloaded like it is on some streets. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, last and final call for any other members of the public who wish to speak. Seeing none, we will go ahead and close public comment and turn it back to the commission for deliberations on this item. Any commissioners want to kick things off? If not, I'm happy to jump in. I'll kick things off here. I'll just kick things off sort of consistent with some of my past precedent and similar projects and similar requests. I'm supportive of the project. To me, this is a very, very modest project. The end result is under 1,600 square foot home. We've seen a lot of projects as of late where people are doing, second story additions and much larger expansions. And to me, this is, at some level, I kind of like seeing these. It's a way of people still keeping some really modestly sized Albany homes, modestly sized while still updating them. And to me, that means that this home will likely stay in that condition for many years to come after this investment is made. And so it sort of retains that modest, more sort of entry level accessibility in our housing stock, which I think we have got a little bit of risk of losing. It also preserves the existing architectural style of the house. And I think in reality, knowing these detached garages that are at the back of these lots, although you might be able to get in, and I was actually happy to hear Mr. Peterson chime in that gate does fully open and allow for a car back there. I do think it's really hard to traverse those types of really long, narrow driveways, getting in and out regularly. And so I think those types of garages are, if they're used at all, tend to be more for storage purposes of a car that you don't drive regularly than daily commuting type of vehicles. I also think the driveway right now, in that it will still provide about 33 feet, I believe, if I'm reading the plans right. I'll go back to the site plan really quickly, but I think even after the project, it'll provide just shy of about 34 feet if you include the front setback of space with sufficient width to park in it. Or of a reasonable width to park in it. I know in other jurisdictions, I know the Albany requirements, this does technically trigger, but I do think you can get a car with 15 feet of length. That's sort of considered industry standard for a compact car. So I do think pragmatically one could get two cars if parking on the street got really, really tight over time. I think this family could park two compact cars still in that driveway if they wanted to. But I also think from just an equity perspective here, when you look around the neighborhood, the immediate adjacent neighbor has one off-street parking space on their property that is likely deficient in total dimension. And when you just do like a little, actually both adjacent neighbors only have one off-street parking space. And so I do think there's an equity component here of not holding this property owner to a different standard. Even if it's the code standard, I think this is where our discretion can come in terms of an appropriate deviation from the letter of the law, enabling a really modest size addition that's sensitively designed and in keeping with the existing neighborhood character. So for those reasons, I'm supportive of this project as proposed, including the findings that are outlined for the parking reduction. Anyone else?
Next one. Okay.
Sure, Commissioner Donaldson.
Yeah, sure. What's kind of persuasive to me, actually, and I think I will support the project, is that in this street, in this neighborhood, there's a good supply of on-street parking. And so I'm not very worried about creating some parking impacts by having this home with one legal space. So that's it. And I don't think the neighborhood is located in such a place where nothing's happening. It's going to radically add more saturation to the parking demand on the street, as far as I know, and probably been pretty stable for many years in that way. So So I think I'm okay with this project, and it is very modest. And in fact, as I noticed right away, it's at 219 square feet. It's below the 240 square feet that kind of triggers the requirement, that the mandate that we look at a parking reduction. So I'm okay with it, and I think I'll support it.
Commissioner Moment?
Yeah, I think your argument was very persuasive. I agree with Commissioner Donaldson. I think practically looking, 33 feet would be enough for parking 2 compact spaces, and Albany doesn't have any parking standard for compact spaces as many big cities have. So it is possible to park two cars there in an event where there are 2 cars owned by the family.
Great, thank you. Commissioner McLeod?
Yeah, I find what you've been saying very persuasive, especially Wadi's comments. Yeah, it is a very modest addition. I do struggle a little bit with the fact that, for me, it's a little hard to make the findings, strictly speaking, especially when it's, you could design around it a bit to make it work a little better and have 2 legal spots, at least one in the front. Setback, it would have to have an exception. But I do hear what everyone is saying. It's not an impacted neighborhood. It's very similar to the other houses. But I do sort of worry about precedent and saying, okay, well, if you just build into your parking spaces, then you can claim it's a hardship to redesign. That doesn't really cut it for me, and it wouldn't cut it for me in a lot of other instances that would be different, not necessarily parking, where, okay, I've designed it this way and I'm encroaching or I'm doing other things, and now it's a hardship to redesign it to not do that. I could see that you could just narrow the dining room by a couple of feet and you could have 2 full-size spaces in the front, but I do understand kind of the architectural integrity of it, and the interior spaces do work a lot better with the dining room a little bit wider. Although when I do look at the plan, the floor plan, there's sort of a big circulation space in the middle next to the dining room, but you could always put a longer dining room table in there. But I could see that if the dining room were a little bit narrower, you would still have plenty of room for the table there. There's a very large circulation space that's really not used for much other purpose. So I'm a little ambivalent, but I think in the end I would support the project as is.
I want to clarify one point. There actually has been precedent established for this type of application request and approval. I think it was before your time on the commission, Commissioner McLeod, but there was a project at 1122 Garfield, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where the homeowners had originally proposed a 2nd-story addition. And they redesigned it to be a 1-story addition with that encroachment that was more palatable for the neighbors and shadow issues, and was also more within the budget for those homeowners who pursued the project. So even though the circumstances are different, this wouldn't be setting a precedent with this particular application approval tonight.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it still is within our capabilities to review each project individually and make individual decisions. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't necessarily lock our hands going forward. And we did a very similar project about, was it 6 months ago, where they built into the setback the driveway space and put a stair, et cetera. And I was actually fine with that, but they did have they did end up with 2 full spaces, including the area in the front setback. So that seemed a little easier for me to accept in that sense. But, I agree that it's probably a long enough driveway, even left to accommodate 2 smaller cars. So that's also, that's a variable we can't control for, but, it could happen with enough space there. So, okay, thank you.
Commissioner Moman?
Yeah, I want to ask planning staff, is there a precedent where we have approved 8 feet wide parking space?
Yeah. 8.
Okay.
Yeah, we've had situations where, based on existing conditions, the commission does have discretion to make findings for a reduced width parking space.
Great. With that, would anyone like to make a motion on this item?
Oh, sure. Mhm.
Sure. Thanks, Commissioner Donaldson.
All right, sure. Yeah, I'll move approval then of finding application 21056 for design review and a parking reduction for a single-story addition at 1110 Pomona.
Okay. Do we have a second on that motion?
I'll second.
Commissioner McLeod? Great. On that motion then, Commissioner Moman,
Yes.
Commissioner McLeod,
Yes.
Commissioner Donaldson,
Yes. Mhm.
and I vote yes as well. So that item passes 4-0. That moves us on to the second item under item 7 on our agenda this evening, item 7B. It's planning application 21-062. This is the UC Village Master Sign Program amendment. With that, go ahead and turn it over to staff. And Chris, I think you're on mute.
You're muted, I think.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. That's what I thought. Okay, thank you. Once again, this is the amendment for the UC Village Master Sign Program. I'll do a quick presentation. We're happy to answer any questions afterwards. Some background. On September 9th, 2015, the Planning and Zoning Commission approved the Master Sign Program for the University Village Shopping Center. The Master Sign Program provides regulations for signage proposed on the buildings on site, as well as a freestanding sign. There are, however, no regulations or restrictions on electronic/digital signage. Everyone knows the Sprouts Shopping Center or the UC Village Shopping Center. This is a street view of it on San Pablo. Analysis, building permit. A building permit application was filed with the Community Development Department for 2 electrical vehicle chargers at the UC Village Shopping Center. When the project was originally constructed, conduit was installed as part of the overall construction of the site. However, it was not connected to any chargers themselves. The proposed charging units that were filed with the city include a 55-inch media display. Free electricity for vehicle charging is supported through third-party advertising content on the chargers themselves. All signage proposed on the charging units is through the digital media displays themselves, and the advertising content is thus dynamic and ever-changing based on the paid sponsors. And here's a schematic of the units that were filed with the city or proposed to be installed. And this amendment would allow similarly designed charging units to be installed in the future, should the commission approve the amendment. And then just for informational purposes, the proposed charging stations are located on these 2 locations in the lot. This is Pet Food Express right here. And then amendment initiation. The city initiated the proposed amendment for the UC Village Master Sign Program. The proposed amendment would permit digital signage on electric vehicle chargers only and would not allow digital signage on any of the actual built structures on site. The permitted digital signage on the charging unit themselves would help facilitate and encourage the installation of electric vehicle chargers at the shopping center. And digital signage for the tenant spaces is not proposed under this amendment, nor is it currently permitted right now. Staff has not received any correspondences in regard to this project proposal. As far as CEQA, the environmental impact report was certified by the City Council via Resolution 2011-51, as well as an addendum to the EIR approved on May 6th of 2013. An environmental impact report for the project was approved by the City Council in July of 2012. The proposed sign design review does not generate any new or substantially severe impacts than what were previously analyzed in the project EIR. And with that, staff recommends that the Planning and Zoning review and approve the project request subject to the findings and conditions of approval. And with that, we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Do any commissioners have any questions for staff before we turn it over to the applicant for a presentation? Commissioner Momin.
Yeah, so it is not clear whether the amendment is for all future use of digital displays or just these two locations.
The amendment is proposed for all electronic vehicle charger units themselves.
Okay.
So just a quick question following up on that. So there could be one of these ultimately, in theory, at every single parking space?
Right. That's what I wanted to follow up with that later. Yeah, because we need some guidelines regarding that.
We don't have, there's not a limitation within the master sign program. This is really just the request to allow the signage as part of an EV installation, but to your point, there isn't a restriction or limitation on the number of EV structures that could be installed on that property.
Okay. Thanks.
And just add further, if there was no signage component to these charger units, then this wouldn't be going before the commission for review. They would just go through the normal building permit process.
Commissioner McLeod.
Yeah, so the screen, the actual digital screen is the big rectangle, the vertical rectangle in the middle there.
Correct.
And that's on both sides of the charger.
Yes.
And so is the ordinance, I'm sorry, are we writing it such that the digital signage has to be integral to the unit itself? It can't be like some piece they add on top of it, or, I mean, are we limiting the size of that digital display as well? I mean,
we haven't proposed any specific specifications as far as how much area on the units themselves they need to be allocated towards digital signage. The amendment is just to merely allow electric vehicle chargers with digital signage to be permitted. And the only type of digital signage that would be permitted are on electric vehicle chargers.
right. Okay.
Commissioner Momin, question?
Yes, I have one more follow-up question on sheet C100 site plan that shows two locations, and then on the location on the north side of the north side, basically, it shows two charging stations. One is the big one with digital display, and then there is other one, smaller one, which says Ulta L2 single remote charging unit. And so what is the difference between the two? And if in future, if there are like multiple charging stations installed on this side, which one would be installed, the smaller ones or bigger ones?
This amendment doesn't, like I said, specify the area on the charging units for digital signage. So in theory, if another type of charging unit that was proposed with larger or smaller digital media display, then that would also be permitted if it were approved as presented to the commission right now.
Okay, but that space has two charging stations. So I would like to understand what is the rationale behind that and basically how it works.
Let's see. And just really quick, what sheet are you referring to on the plan set?
C100, and then there are detailed sheets that shows the cut sheets of those individual charging stations. So you can look at that. Look at C104 and C304 and C302. So there are basically two models shown on those sheets. The one is with digital display, which is 55-inch digital display and 85 feet tall equipment. And then there is, so that is on C302. And then if you look at C304, there is a smaller L2 remote charging unit cut sheet on the left side of the sheet, left bottom. So that also shows a charging station with dual, single or dual connectors.
Sorry, I'm having a little trouble opening the document here. But let's see. It's something I would have to do a little more research into. If there is no signage permitted on it, or digital signage at least, then that would be just subject to a building permit.
Yeah, there is no signage on that. The reason I'm asking is, again, the same question that I asked in the beginning. Would we be okay with having digital displays on each charging station at each parking stall? Or there is a possibility that there would be charging stations without those big displays, and digital displays would be only at vantage points, maybe at the end of the parking rows or such like.
I mean, I suppose that would be up to the discretion of the property owner on what type of units they would want on site, whether it all be with digital signage or some without.
Okay, considering the size, we also, I'm assuming that in future, in next 10 years or so, we would see more such parking charging stations in all such parking lots. And so, yeah, if we might, we need to be more clear about the digital displays, particularly because, these are revenue generating EV charging stations, which will be paying for the electricity and providing basically free charging for those. And so are we okay seeing multiple of these in a parking lot? And then they also come with big, what they call it, PCS, power control systems. They are like 7 feet tall boxes, and they are not really attractive to look at. They are located one near the entrance. And so it would be, I think, useful to have some guidelines in terms of locating them. And also we should have some design guidelines, landscape design guidelines in terms of conceiving them. I have seen, some of these. One closer to us is Ranch 99 Mall. And there Tesla has installed a couple of charging stations, and they are like 5-6 huge these control systems right next to the sidewalk, and they look really cluttered.
Just to clarify something, these particular charging units would only be permitted at University Village as part of their master sign program and development. So if there were other property owners that wish to pursue EV installation, they would be subject to their own review process, probably something similar like the discussion we're having this evening. This particular approval, it would be just specific to that site. It would not have any implications in other parts of the city.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, so I assumed that, and that's how I'm commenting on that. There is a possibility that we might see more of these on this site, on this particular site.
Any other questions for staff before we turn it over to the project applicant? Seeing none, why don't we go ahead and open it up for the project applicant to present.
We actually don't have an applicant for this. This was actually staff taking this to the commission as part of the building permit processing.
Got it. Okay, then no need for that. Why don't we go ahead then and open it up for public comment on this item? And then our Commissioner Donaldson, did you have a question before we open it up for public comment? Oh, you're on mute. Commissioner, you're on mute. Commissioner Donaldson, you're on mute. Not sure.
My
Oh, there you
apologies.
go. That's
Yes, am I okay now?
Yeah.
I did have questions for the applicant. And if the applicant's not here, then I want to make sure my questions get out. But maybe you should open it up to the public first and then we'll bring it back.
Sounds great. All right, with that, then now is the time for members of the public who wish to comment on this item. If you do have comments on this item, please go ahead and raise your hand to get in the queue. It looks like we have at least one person who'd like to speak. And staff will go ahead and turn it over to you guys to call the queue.
Sure. The first speaker, Nick Peterson, you have 3 minutes to speak starting now.
Boy, there are a lot of interesting topics for me on this. Nick Peterson, I'm a resident in Albany, California, and also a member of the Albany Climate Action Coalition, of which I'm speaking for now. Albany has a dearth of EV charge stations, especially ones that would support people that can't afford to have a charge station put into their home or don't have control, like tenants that don't have control over their facilities and can't put in a level 2 charge station. The city has been working for a long time to put in some public charge stations, even on city property. And I think it's 3 years and they still haven't gotten the funding together to do it. So I commend this happening. One of the ways, these units are expensive, and especially if they're commercial grade and not just like something you have at a residential home. So they're expensive. The companies that make them charge a lot, and there's an infrastructure that does have to go in to support them. With this, these aren't, I think these are level 2. Someone could nod if that's what it is. So what Maman was explaining about the Tesla, those are superchargers, direct current, and those have big, huge transformers that need to create this direct current that then goes to the charge stations themselves. These won't have that, so we're not going to have these big, huge boxes. But as someone who wants to see a lot of these going in all over Albany to support people who want to drive EV and attract people who drive EV to Albany, I'm a little concerned about sort of making, kind of a purely aesthetic. Granted, we don't want a lot of glitzy signage with a lot of motion and movement and videos playing all over the place, but we could restrict them to just non-video type content and just have, display static art. But again, we're talking about in a parking lot. And frankly, I think a parking lot is pretty much an aesthetic statement in itself, where you're saying we're going to level this area of and just stick in a bunch of cars that sit around. So the aesthetics of a parking lot might be different than the aesthetics of, say, where you put it on the street right on Solano Avenue. But anyway, I really support this. I think we need to be innovative and allow for commercial applications so that we get these chargers into Albany so that people can start using them. And this one, I think City of Richmond also has looked into putting in quite a few chargers, and I think they have some of these Volta chargers in place. And it's great because they put them in and they make revenue off the advertising, and you don't have to pay as much up front to get them in your facility. So I would recommend that we look at this favorably and help the future come to Albany. Thank you.
Thanks. So any other members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Now is your chance. All right. Seeing no additional speakers, we'll go ahead and close public comment and turn it back to the commissioners for deliberations on this item. Would anyone like to kick things off? Sure, Commissioner Donaldson.
Sure, I can give it a try. Yeah, I did have a lot of questions about this, and I'm let's see, where can I start here? One thing is, it looked like the designs were for making a disabled parking space, taking up 2 parking spaces. And I just will want clarification. I'm sure that this is for an electric vehicle that a non-disabled person can drive, but we need to be clear about that you don't have to have a disabled placard to use these parking spaces. And I wanted to verify that with the applicant that that's how they work. And then before I vote on this, I really want to know more about how the media things work. Who will see the screen? Is this something you sit in your car and watch television while it's charging? I don't think so. Is this an advertisement? It looks to me like this is advertising driven. that will be visible to people driving in and out of the shopping center. So you probably have, Colgate Palmolive or Shell Oil or something like that paying for these chargers, and they'll be running ads all the time. And that's a pretty big screen, 52 inches. And what kind of screen is it? Is it one that is light sensitive so that it's not super bright at night like the Ranch 99 sign? Does it adjust to ambient light? What is the content and who determines what the content is? My suspicion here is that these folks want to run as many high-paying ads as they can because the charging is free. And they say that in there that they get an 80% usage rate. 80% of the time these chargers are used. I get that because it looks like you go in and you plug your car in, you get free electricity, a free charge, you walk away from your car, go shopping, while the ads that are charging your car are being displayed to the rest of the Albany public, whoever might go by there. I think the whole thing's kind of tacky. I don't know. And it bothers me, not bothers me that the university is proposing it in a way. I think we need, I don't, but that's I shouldn't be making those comments, I guess, kind of snide, but this bothers me. And I'd like to know more about this. I'd ideally like to know if there is one or two or more active in Richmond or other places. I'd really like to see one and see how they work. Where are the screens directed? How bright are they? What do they show? Those are my questions. Do they run 24 hours a day? And then based on Chris's presentation, it looks to me like we have an application here for 2 chargers, but what we would be approving would be amendment to the village master signage program that would not specify 2 chargers only, but that would potentially allow many more of these Volta units to be developed in the parking lot. I wondering if we can restrict the number, or I don't know what the right number would be. I think we should have many more chargers. I agree with that. But I'd sure rather see UC Berkeley paying for them and putting them in rather than try to get free chargers that are going to be run off advertising. It bothers me. Anyway, those are my initial comments. And without the applicant here, without more information, I'd be inclined to say we should continue this until we get some answers, if we can't get them tonight.
I think just clarify a couple of things.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So this isn't being sponsored by UC. This is actually being sponsored by the property owner, which is obviously a shopping center owner. So UC is not in the fold with this.
Okay.
One other thing to point out is that when this project was approved, plan checked, constructed, it was under the 2013 building codes, at which time there were no requirements for EV chargers. They took the time to put in the conduit for the future installation, but obviously did not install any infrastructure. So this is really the first opportunity to get EV chargers at this particular property. While there's only 2 chargers proposed right now, that is because that's where the conduit is, which isn't to say there couldn't be future EV infrastructure at another point in time. However, that would require additional installation of conduits. So it wouldn't be as simple as simply coming to us with the building permit application. There would be extensive conduit installation that would have to occur in order to facilitate that.
Great, thanks, that's helpful. I'm happy to jump in with just a couple of comments that I have on this. This one's kind of a little bit tough for me. Digital advertising, especially at sort of a pedestrian level, is normally something I am not terribly keen on. However, I think right now, really the question before us is a trade-off of, do we get chargers that are basically free to the public, where we do have a lot of residents who don't have the ability to install chargers in their homes, and be able to bring that accessibility of electric vehicles, not just to people who have private garages and have sort of the capital to install, but really give people a bit more of an option to own a electric vehicle regardless of their housing accommodation situation. And, in a perfect world, developers would just do it on their own dime. But I think we have to be also a little bit pragmatic here, that people usually don't spend money for just out of the good of their heart. They're looking at their bottom line and making sure their expenditures match their revenue on these things. So I'm a little bit torn with that. I would feel comfortable with this, with probably a couple sort of bookends around this, so that we can control where this evolves in the future. Again, I think if this application was just for exactly what we saw in front of us, and it was a finite application, I wouldn't have any concerns with it. I think the concept of this could be a blanket approval for future ones, even though it's good to know it would be a little more difficult because there isn't conduit installed, makes me a little bit more nervous just to have that blanket statement. I don't think any of us want to see every single parking space 10 years from now have one of these things with double-sided digital media on it. That could be a little intense. And I would agree with Commissioner Donaldson's word of sort of tacky looking. But, my thought on this is, if there is a way, and sort of thinking about this a little bit more from a pilot approach of, capping it at no more than 20 installations. And if they, because there's a fair amount of parking throughout this. So 20 is still a fairly low percentage, but, capping it at some numeric threshold, I kind of just pulled 20 out of my hat here. And also putting some parameters around the size of the digital display, so that we've got confidence that these things aren't going to grow over time, that even if the technology changes and the shape might change, no more than that 52 or 53 inch screen, no matter sort of how it's designed, fencing and landscaping around the what's it called? The power control system, and then some sort of, if the digital advertising has to turn off at night, because I agree that I don't think this is something we necessarily want glowing at, 3-4 o'clock in the morning, especially since there's a lot of, this area dies a little bit at night, and it would be a little awkward to have a large number of these glowing advertisements running 24/7. But to me, those seem like fairly reasonable things that we could put some controls around, or set some parameters, so that you guys know that, hey, if any of these things need to be modified, that they have to come back for a subsequent amendment to the master sign program, just so that there's a little bit of expectation setting. I don't know if it's doable, but I would also be interested in seeing if the applicant would be open to some sort of, 1-to-1 ratio of, for every EV charger with advertising that's put in, they have to put in an EV charger without advertising, to kind of increase the number of these things that are free and accessible to the public, but not, not having each and every one run advertising nonstop. Again, I don't know if that pencils, or if that's something that the applicant would be willing to do, but those are some of sort of the thoughts and questions, at least, that kind of come to my mind on this. But I certainly would be open to it, with some controls around sort of expectation setting for what this could look like in the future. With that, Commissioner Moman.
Yeah, so I would just like to reiterate what I said in the beginning. I totally support this idea. I'm completely okay with digital displays subsidizing free electricity for EV charging stations. As I mentioned in the beginning, it would be useful to have some clarity on the locations of these and distribution per parking stall. And if there is a possibility to have smaller charging stations, these could be grouped with one digital display, if the financials work with that. And again, we should have some guidelines in terms of locations of these displays, as well as the PCS. This particular system is showing one big PCS, which is like 7 feet tall. So it's not, even if it is level 2, they still have shown one. And so it is possible that in future, if they install more such charging stations, there would be more PCS standing in the space. And I understand I am Nick Peterson's sentiments about this being parking area, but this particular parking is nice landscape. It is not completely a backyard parking lot with just blacktop. So I would like to see the landscape maintained, the quality of landscape maintained, and not cluttered with these big boxes. And I would also concur with Commissioner Donaldson about accessible parking space. I understand that the accessibility shown in this accessibility details shown in the drawings for charging stations are accessibility for charging stations only, and they are not required accessible spaces. The accessible spaces required or elsewhere, and so there should be clarity of signage showing that this is not an accessible parking space, but a conventional parking space with accessible features for just a charging station. So that could be used accordingly.
Great, Commissioner McLeod.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with a lot of the comments, and in principle, I 100% support getting more EV charging stations in place. So I guess, my questions are similar to some of what Commissioner Donaldson raised. What's the nature of the signage? Is it just a static backlit fixed sign sort of thing, or is it flashing? Is it video? Sort of assume it would just be like a static backlit image, but I don't know. Maybe that could be clarified for us. I would really be unhappy if somehow these signs got bigger or got somewhat displaced from the actual unit or was placed on top of the unit or something at some point, some other design. So I don't know if we need some sort of limits on how high it could be or all that. I would wonder about what kind of a distraction it would be at night if you're driving around and it's changing light and color. I don't know, even in a parking lot, that might be a little distracting. They're just getting an understanding of how static that image would be or how busy it would be visually. And maybe there's some sort of shut off point, I don't know, 1 hour after sunset or something, or I don't know. And then, EV stations do have to comply with the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. So the parking stall has to be ADA accessible. So that's why it's got the extra space there. But it shouldn't be, exclusively ADA. And maybe there's some signage that could clarify that. But yeah, it does, from what I remember from a course I took not too long ago, is that these stations have to be ADA accessible, and that's why they're bigger. So it may be difficult for the property owners to actually install a lot more without giving up a lot more parking, and it would actually probably be pretty difficult without the conduit in place to do more. I was just wondering, can we do this as a pilot, some sort of pilot project with the two of them, does it have to be a blanket approval, or can we do a conditional approval where, I don't know how we would evaluate it in 1 year or something, or any thoughts on that, Anne or Christopher?
I think it's a little bit tricky to do that because this isn't a request for a conditional use permit. So it's not the same level of discretion that you would have with a cup. I think you would be within your discretion to establish limitations on the number of units and the size. So if, based on what I'm hearing tonight, the preference is to take a pilot approach, I think this could be conditioned to say that there shall be two and that, be consistent with the sizing presented and not larger than that. And then if by some chance the project sponsor wanted to modify that, they would have to come back to the commission for an amendment to the master sign program.
Yeah, I think I would support some limit on the size. I mean, no bigger than the ones presented, perhaps, would be one way to do it. Um, you know, I guess I worry about a little bit about visual kind of, for lack of a better word, visual blight, if there were a lot of them. And I certainly wouldn't want to have them visible from the street or much visible from the street. It just kind of depends on how distracting the images are and if they're changing a lot or if it's video type thing or it's just a backlit sign for, you know, like some bank. It might be a little more acceptable in that sense, but
Chris, can you pull up the site plan from your presentation?
Oh yeah, I was also just going
oh,
to
there
show
we go.
the
Okay, well,
website.
that helps.
This just kind of accurately displays what what type of advertisement would be there. It does have the potential to be animated. I don't know if anyone's been to the Veranda in Concord, but they have similarly, I can't remember if it's Volta exactly, but they have similar charger stations there. And they're not everywhere. They're like usually around like the corner ends of the parking lots, but it's similar in this. And it would probably most likely be animated to a certain degree because that is one of the advantages of having digital signage in this type of media form. So that's just that. And I can bring up the site plan as well. Let's start this. And then let's see.
Well, if I could just, yeah, I mean, having them turn off at night at some point. I mean, the business is shut mostly at what, 9 or something, maybe 10, or maybe there's a restaurant that's open later. I mean, we could have some cutoff time, 11 p.m. or something for that. I don't know how that works with the operators and whether they can program. They should be able to program them any way they want, I would suppose. Well, in theory, I'm 100% in support of putting EV charging stations in place. So, but the bargain is in the details with this one. So, yeah, I guess I would be comfortable saying, you know, no signage bigger than what's been presented, and some time limit after dark to turn them on or turn them off and not back on until, I don't know what, 7 a.m. or something, or corresponding more to business hours maybe. And I have no idea how the applicant feels about that, but it would be good to hear what their point of view is.
Okay, sorry, bear with me as my computer loads this. Okay, and here's the site plan.
Yeah. All right, well, you've got that up. Commissioner Momin, did you have any additional comments on this?
Yeah, just thought it could be useful to include a requirement of dark night sky, requirement of lighting design, and that might take care of turning off after a certain time in the evening. And I also wanted to support the idea of a pilot project if that is technically feasible while we are working on more comprehensive guidelines for future use that would be included in the master design plan.
Commissioner Donaldson?
Yes, I don't see why this has to be approved tonight. I'm really in favor of a continuance. We can defer this to the next meeting. That's what I think. I think it's very useful, the video that Chris showed or the animation he showed. And if there is one in Concord, I'd be happy to drive out there and look at it so I can see for myself, you know, exactly how this works. My questions still remain. I mean, what kind of advertising is going to be on here? Another question is there sound associated with this? And I don't know. There may be, there may not be. So I really think the right thing to do would be to continue this and have someone representing the applicant here or the Volta company here next time, and or give us instructions as to how to do a field visit so we can see this in operation. And that's what I'd like to do. I think the other commissioners' comments about the restrictions are very well taken, and I do see this as a pilot program, and I would like us to have some conditions on this, I guess, so that we can see if it works and see if it fits in the shopping center in Albany. Another minor concern I had, and I forgot to bring it up the first time, is that this one of those stations is sitting right next to our public art that was built as a part of this project. And so I consider that in some respects, kind of a sensitive location. I don't know if this advertising would conflict with that, might even complement it. Because there's a bench there, a couple benches there underneath those amoeba umbrellas. I don't know how much they get used, the benches, but anyway, I'd really like to see them make sure that we don't end up with an aesthetic and design conflict with the public art installation that was approved for the shopping center there. So anyway, I'm prepared to make a motion to continue, and I hope it can get the votes. Yeah.
And just one last quick thing that I'll just chime in on, just in response, Commissioner Donaldson, to one of your comments about the substance of the advertising, and certainly planning staff, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe legally jurisdictions are not allowed to regulate the content of advertising, or the content of any sign. Can regulate illumination, size, location, placement, those sorts of things, but not content.
That's correct. We're required
Totally.
for federal law to maintain.
I understand that. I'm not proposing to regulate.
Oh, okay.
Not proposing to regulate the content.
So I think we have to assume that their advertising would be anything under the sun.
Assume the worst case. Maybe so.
Whatever they want, but I think for our focus, the fact that it's changing, it's not a static image, and that it's digital are the things for us to be cognizant of. So with that, we do have a motion on the floor for continuance. Would somebody like to make a second on that motion? I'm happy to make a second on that, but we may not have the votes to pass it. So I'm happy to make a second, and then why don't we just go ahead and call the continuance? Well, why don't we, Commissioner Donaldson, could I make a friendly amendment suggestion of a date certain, so that we don't have to put staff through renoticing this?
For sure, yes.
Maybe for staff, if you had any recommendations of what amount of time, given the commentary today, would be appropriate in giving other agendas.
Yeah, I think the next meeting of September 22nd would be fine.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Okay, so a continuance to September 22nd, and I've seconded that. So on that motion, Commissioner McLeod?
I'm a little ambivalent. I wouldn't be adverse to approving it tonight with some restrictions, but I think in the interest of just getting some more information, I think that's fine. And 2 weeks shouldn't be a big delay for the applicant, I wouldn't think. So I'll vote yes on the continuance.
Okay. Commissioner Moment?
Yeah, I too would have liked to see it approved today as a pilot project, but again, two weeks is not a big time frame, so would like to see a next level of work during the next meeting. So I would vote yes for continuance.
Okay. Great. Commissioner Donaldson?
I vote yes.
And I vote yes as well. So we'll go ahead and continue that item 4-0 to September 22nd, our next planning commission hearing. That moves us along on our agenda to item 8, new business. And we have one item, parking policies discussion. That'll turn it over to staff.
I'm going to give you a very brief presentation. Really, the intent with this particular item tonight is to give the commission and members of the public to chime in on the rather meaty topic of parking, which, given where we are in our meeting, clearly it's constituted a lot of conversation just tonight. Just to give the commission some background, we talk about parking quite a bit in the regular course of our meetings. And over the course of really this past year, there's been a lot of discussion, whether it's related to the specific plan or anticipation of large development projects. There's been a lot of conversation about that, and we thought it appropriate to designate this as a discussion item for the commission so that you can express your thoughts on this as well as take public comment. I think the big picture, at least at a staff level for us, is that we hear a lot of different things. As I mentioned, this has come up in the specific plan just this evening. We've discussed this in the context of electric vehicle chargers as well as parking on private residential property. And then we've heard a lot of things in between, whether it's amending the zoning code or revisiting the topic of implementing permit parking in specific areas of the city. Overall, we're kind of looking for a clear goal. If that can be provided as part of this discussion tonight, that would help us be better informed as to potential policy changes that may come about. And within your packet, we provided the study from 2017 that was done as part of an ACTC grant that evaluated on-street occupancy collection on Solano, as well as the surrounding streets, 800 and 900 blocks, as well as San Pablo Avenue. That data collection was done, as I mentioned, a few years ago, and it was ultimately presented to both planning and zoning, transportation, and climate action, ultimately going to the council in April of 2017 with no recommendation for implementation at that time. The data that was revealed as part of that showed that there really wasn't a benefit to implementing permit parking at that time relative to the investment that would have been required. As this commission and all members of the community know, we're pretty old school in our parking enforcement with chalking tires. So to do a project of a program of this scale would require significant investment in license plate reader technology, as well as staffing and administration. We never got that far in the process. But again, if this were to be revisited, I think there's the first step in that process is data collection. And then from that, if it's concluded that there's an issue that requires further examination of that, there would be a cost benefit analysis to administering a program to determine, the real world costs with implementation and long-term management. And so that, would be a function of which department that lands in, this investment in the license plate reader technology, as well as signage installation for those areas that would be subject to permit parking, as well as the permit issuance itself. And of course, it ultimately rests with the city council for implementation for an effort of that sort. And as I mentioned, we never got that far in 2017, but we've provided you all of that background information so you would have that for the discussion tonight. With that, we're just going to turn it over to the commission. And also we have a few people, I'm sure, who wish to address the commission on this. There's not going to be any formal action that's taken tonight. It's really to initiate the conversation, to understand, what the issues are, both with the commission and any members of the public, and kind of go from there. So with that, I will stop my screen share. I can answer questions, but I see we already have hands raised.
And if commissioners don't mind, since this isn't an action item, why don't we just go straight to public comment, open that up, and then we can turn it back and have a question and commentary session with commissioners. Great. So with that, now is the public's opportunity to get in the queue to provide public comment on this. So if you are in the queue, please go ahead and raise your hand. I see that we already have 3 folks, and staff, if you'd like to go ahead and open it up for comment.
Ed Fields, you're the first speaker.
Good evening. First of all, I'm not sure that permit parking solves any problems. So I think you'd have to identify what you would expect it to do. But I want to like the commission to focus its attention on off-street parking, which is your purview, and to reduce the parking requirement in the R1 zone to the same or less than what it is in multifamily zones. There's a certain absurdity and hypocrisy in requiring 2 spaces per dwelling unit in a low-density R1 zone and only 1 space or less, or even 0, in a higher density R3 or SPC or Solano zones. And let's talk about this absurdity and hypocrisy. Let's look at the Pomona Avenue project that you just approved this evening. As Commissioner Donaldson pointed out, that project really only came before you because of parking. They only paid an administrative design review fee. It would have been decided without going before the commission. But it cost the homeowner and many other homeowners $700 to ask for a parking waiver or parking reduction. But if you read the code, it says the requirements may be modified or reduced through Planning and Zoning Commission review. The requirements. The code gives you zero authority to eliminate an existing required parking space. And in fact, you use section 2028-040A2, which is only for projects greater than 240 square feet. This project's only 219 square feet, and it goes under subsection 1, which says no additional parking spaces will be required. Okay, but you put it under A2, which says the commission may reduce the parking requirement, but not reduce the parking. I didn't speak on this item because I think it should have been approved. But it should have been approved because the requirement should only be one space per dwelling unit in R1. And I didn't want to mess up the homeowner's perfectly modest project. But look at the machinations that this commission has to go through to accomplish this. So I think it's time, folks. I think it's time. Look at what you just did. You went totally, you have no authority by the code to do what you did. But you try to massage it into a section that it doesn't apply to, and then use that to approve the project.
Time's up. Next speaker, Nick Peterson. You have 3 minutes starting now.
Yeah, hi, Nick Peterson again. Thank you for staff for bringing this forward. I think this is a good time to talk about it. I'm now going to put my hat on as a member of the Climate Action Committee, not speaking officially for the committee, but as someone that's interested in how to implement climate change actions. So the city has very few levers and tools it can use. It can use codes, it can use regulations. In Albany, we really don't do, parking is pretty much free. It's been free forever. Nobody wants to look at it. We got cars all over the place. You go up and down streets around my area, they're just cars littering everything. There's no incentive to get rid of cars. I have a neighbor that has 7 cars, 7, of which only 1 they can park in their driveway. So having a parking permit system or some sort of management system would allow you to start putting a little bit of pain behind the aspect of owning a car and parking it for free on the city streets. You could charge different amounts for different kind of vehicles. You got a big gas guzzler, you pay more. You got an electric vehicle, maybe it's free. So all of a sudden you have a way to incentivize people to make the right choices about the type of vehicle they drive, which you couldn't do at all before. We're asking for higher density housing in certain areas, and the first thing everyone brings up is spillover parking into adjacent R1 zones. Well, you can have parking permits, and that can control spillover. So you can implement a study based on a developer's proposal and just take a set area and actually start looking at what it takes to implement parking permit system. And I like the idea of using license plate scanners, so you don't need to have stickers or anything. It's just entered in the system, something goes along, scans the plate, either it's in or it's not. The city has virtually zero data on what the vehicle ownership is in the city. We try to know who's buying electric vehicles, who doesn't. We can look at the DMV registrations for the 94706 area code, but then that spills into areas of Berkeley and everything. So there's no way to get any of this data. This would allow us to get some data. There are all sorts of advantages. We're in a new era. we need to quickly incentivize people to start making correct decisions as far as how they transport themselves around, get rid of vehicles that are polluting. At some point, we should have laws that don't allow you to rent a property or own a vehicle that puts carbon into the air. Now, we can't do that right now, so we need to start talking about this at this point so we can gradually bring these in. Parking isn't going to be all of a sudden everyone pays X, you can phase it in. You know, the first time people get their parking permit, it's free. Everybody gets a free permit.
Time's up. Oops. Next speaker is Brian Martin. Brian, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Brian Martin. I'm a resident of the 600 block of Adams, and I did want to echo what Ed Fields was saying to some extent of the inequitable issue of having if you're having reduced parking along San Pablo, also have reduced parking requirements throughout the city. I was listening off and on to one development with a discussion for maybe half an hour where people were trying to count how many parking spaces there were and making sure they had enough parking spaces. And this is in a quiet residential development, part of Albany. And I'm thinking, why are they debating, if there's one or two, or who's really caring here? And of course, it's the neighbors. The neighbors don't want to have too many cars parked on the street. Well, I don't want to have too many cars parked on the street either. When there's new developments going in, when there's changes being made. So I think that needs to be equitable. And I think that's something that should be factored in. Also, as from Clay Larson's letter that is on the posted, I wanted to second what he said, that on our block in the evenings, pretty much every space is taken every evening. So that's kind of how things are right now. And I'm not sure, and maybe parking permits are the way to go. Certainly, we're going to have a situation with the bowling alley development and many others where they may be charging over $1,000 a year for a parking space, and yet it's free on the city streets. And we've had people on my block with twice as many cars as drivers. And so, what's the best solution? I'm not sure. And so there's real impact along San Pablo and for these high dense developments. And there's a lot of benefits to having high density, many benefits for high density, and but there's all these impacts. And so something needs to be done for the spillover parking, and it needs to be, the impact needs to be spread around the city for that. Thank you.
Okay, next speaker, we have Dan Johnson. Dan, you have 3 minutes to speak starting now.
Hi, this is Dan. Can you hear me okay? Oh, sounds like, okay. Thank you. Well, I would like to say that I've been paying attention to other cities, right? I'm not a parking expert. I'm an architect, but I pay attention to things. And so Mr. Stroop, I forget his first name off the top of my head, has studied parking more than any of us here. And he's got 3 recommendations. He condensed his life's work into 3 things that you guys need to do, right? And this we're congealing here what everyone has talked about into these 3 items, right? We know we need to move away from this car-centric development, right? Every time you mandate car storage on private property, you're subsidizing the auto industry and the petroleum industry, right? And even the EV chargers, you're still doing auto subsidies. And we all know that we need to get away from cars and start building infrastructure for walking and biking. So before I get to the three things from Mr. Strube, Albany, some facts about Albany. Less than 40% of the people before COVID drove alone in a car to work. So a minority of people drove alone in a car to work. Just as many people took public transit to get to their job as their commute. So you have a constituency of pretty much not car drivers. The city is a square mile. The median ownership of cars is one car according to public data. So people take advantage of the free street stuff because like I'm not allowed to store my regular stuff in the street, but I can store a car there. So, why not? You're severely underpricing that. So I'll stop now and I'll get to the 3 points. So number one, remove off-street parking requirements. Developers and businesses can then decide how many parking spaces to provide for their customers. No parking minimums. Okay, number two, charge the right prices for on-street parking. The right prices are the lowest prices that will leave 1 or 2 open spaces on each block, so there will be no parking shortages. Prices will balance the supply and demand for on-street public car storage. Number three, spend the parking revenue. This is just as important as the first two. Spend the parking revenue to improve public services on metered streets. If everyone sees their meter money at work, the new public services can make demand-based prices for on-street parking politically popular. So there you go. And if I have any time left,
time's up. Next speaker, Amy Smollins. You have 3 minutes starting now.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Amy Smollins. I'm just going to take the points that Nick Peterson and Dan Johnson already made kind of to another step. I'm a member of Albany Strollers and Rollers, and we're a volunteer organization, and we've organized, managed, and co-funded with local businesses and other organizations a great deal of bike racks, which I'm sure you've seen at schools, in parks, and in our business district. That includes bike racks that accommodate more than 200 bicycles on Solano or within a half a block of Solano. That's 200 bicycle parking spaces on or within a half block of Solano Avenue. I'm sure anytime you're on Solano Avenue, you've seen those racks full of bikes from shoppers and business staff and families and kids and people dining and snacking. So please, just in general, whenever you discuss parking, please be sure to include and incorporate bicycle parking. That's parking too in your surveys or plans or decisions about our business districts and residents and anything like that. It's a crucial part of parking. Parking is not only motor vehicles, parking is also bicycles and scooters. So thank you very much.
Next speaker is Nico. Nico, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Nico Nagel, and speaking on behalf of the Housing Action Coalition tonight, a pro-housing nonprofit, just checking in to see how folks are thinking about land use in their city tonight. I really appreciate taking up this conversation. I think this is a conversation that's happening across the Bay Area in all 9 counties and all 101 cities at some degree or another. And I think there is this big realization that we do need to move away from dependence on cars. I think that's certainly an intimidating proposition to some folks, and I get that. I think we are taking other big steps to do other big things, like meeting our state mandated RENA numbers by zoning very differently than we have in the past. Luckily, these 2 items complement each other very well. Having dense housing in areas of the city that can manage it it makes a lot of sense to reduce parking in one way or the other, because there shouldn't be a need if we're zoning and using the correct land use principles. So just want to say, on behalf of the organization, we're supportive of this idea. Appreciate the fact that this is being taken up by the commission, by the city of Albany, and yeah, I would just reinforce. I think this is an idea that takes a step that is complementary to all the other housing policy that's being discussed. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other hands raised from the public.
Okay, great. This is last call for public comment. Seeing no additional hands, we'll go ahead and close public comment and turn it back to the commissioners for discussion. Anyone like to start? Sure, Commissioner Momin.
Yeah, thank you. I think, like all cities, the Bay Area and outside, we are dealing with this situation of conflicting, goals, as it is evident from, current state of natural disasters. We know that climate change is, an imminent threat than what we thought, and so we have a larger goal of reducing the, car dependency and reducing use of vehicle mile travel, and also reducing the construction cost that goes for parking, and increasing affordability. And against that, we have this desire for easy availability of parking, and then there are conflicting demands. At one side, people say reduce the parking ratios, reduce parking standards, even for single-family homes, and then on the other side, they say we do not want overflow parking in our neighborhood, so there should be residential permit parking and things like that. And in addition to that, we also have to look at economic and business development demands. And so I think, this is always a challenge. So looking at current challenges that we want to deal with, I think we should keep the larger environment goals in our mind and look at optimal level of parking availability that could be achieved for residential and commercial uses, and try to find some synergy between and less conflict between the different land uses. And I think, in that effort, the parking management plan studies, I think, are very useful. I was looking at this 2017 parking studies and realized that the average occupancy of parking spaces across the city is around 60%. And Traffic and Safety Commission remarked that no policy changes are needed if it is less than 85%. So there is always this situation where we plan for peak hour demand, and then there is always underutilization during the non-peak hours, and so there is always this tricky balance that needs to be managed for these resources. And I think city has done in the past, we need to keep conducting these studies and update ourselves what is the current situation, and then look at the codes accordingly. One thing I would like to stress here, as we have discussed in our past discussions in regard to San Pablo Avenue specific plan and other areas, there needs to be one more version of study that would look at the current situation of parking and also the future demand when the specific plan development takes shape. I'm sure planning staff and the consultants are working on that, and they will be discussing that for the future next stages of work for specific plan. But I would like to see that being focused for the study, and we should look at the parking standards for the specific avenue, specific plan sites in the light of the parking study that would be done for that exercise. And then, I think while looking at resolving these challenges, we should, I think, decisively shift more towards a multimodal, system of mobility, and prioritize more for mobility alternatives like biking and car sharing and walking, and should have provisions for these kind of features in the designs in our code. And so we should work on the possible alternate codes for these kind of things. And in that context, I also would like to mention we received an email from Nick Peterson about this free shuttle service. I think it is an interesting idea if we want to look at reducing the car use and parking demand. I think that kind of features would be really useful for the city of Albany. We are a small city, and most of our trips are small, for going to school or going to bar or running errands and anything. That kind of service, if it is provided by the city, could also help in a major way in reducing the demand for parking. And then I would also like to comment on residential parking permit. A lot of people have suggested that. Looks like there is some interest in that. And I think Albany Municipal Code already includes that, but it has not been implemented in any neighborhoods. So we should look at that, the possibility of that when we do traffic management study for San Pablo Avenue specific plan, and also look at the provisions. Currently, there is no limit for number of permit issued if any neighborhood goes for that kind of strategy in their neighborhood. So we should look at that. Also, as many people, commentators mentioned, that there are some families which own multiple cars and their houses have just one or two spaces, and so we should try and discourage that kind of situation. And then we should look at higher ratio of car sharing in new neighborhoods, allow more compact spaces. I don't think Albany Municipal Code has any reference to compact spaces and their dimension requirements and proportion of the overall spaces provided. So we should look at that also.
Great, thanks, Commissioner Momin. Any other commissioners want to chime in? Commissioner Donaldson, go ahead.
Sure. All right. Yeah, I put some thoughts together. Let's see. First of all, I want to start out by sort of thanking staff for what a huge staff report on this item. It was interesting for me to reread the 2017 study. I hadn't looked at it for a while, and even look back. It was a full set of data that you submitted, and put it all in one place, and I appreciate that. It's a really good staff report to have. It's very comprehensive, and I wish other people would read it, and because there's a lot there. So based on that, I did go through things, and I do have some sort of notes that I made, some comments I want to make. Let's see, regarding the 2017 CDM study, the parking management plan that was put together, 4 years ago now, 3-4 years ago. The existing commission conditions survey I've found to be very useful. I've always keep it in my briefcase whenever I go to planning commission meetings to look and see what the parking situation might be on some of the streets if they're in the study area where we have projects and where we're looking at parking exceptions. I think it was very good data and a very useful document. So that was the appendix, but that to me, or no, the existing conditions report. But to me, that was the most useful part of that entire report. And there were lots of it. I made comments at the time that I was kind of disappointed with. the forecasts of the future scenarios that were included in that parking management plan were very general, and they failed to address the changing demographics and possible transportation mode changes, which were just starting at the time to be a big issue and are now really important. And most important of all is that the forecasts in that study did not, and they could not have predicted the tripling of our arena, the fact that we're going to be responsible for over 1,000 new units. And I was rereading the report, I was reminded of that because that report was assuming that the sort of growth level of population in Albany was going to be fairly static, 1-2% a year was the main driver of their future projections. It's not the case now. And that with that situation of our arena, it does raise the question of what I think is it brings back all of those parking issues that were discussed in that report right to the front of the agenda right now, I think. So the data in that report did not find a need for a residential permit parking program. They say so right in the middle of the report, that we don't have enough deficiency, enough shortage of parking spaces to warrant a residential parking permit program. And then they go on and they develop one anyway. I guess that's what they were being paid to do. I'm not sure. But anyway, I thought that at the time I commented on that and thought that was a real strange thing. You don't need, they should have said, well, you don't need a residential parking permit program. It's not appropriate for Albany. Then left it there. It's also interesting the work they did at the time, rereading the stakeholder surveys and the comments from the various committees reveal to me emphatic opposition to paying for on-street parking, for parking meters. That's been sort of the history of Albany all the time I've lived here. That was strongly reiterated in the appendices in this parking management plan. It really stood out for me and reminded me of the fact that that is an issue, and that modifying parking so that we pay the cost of it in Albany, as proposed by David Shoup and Professor Shoup and his theory about how to manage parking, would meet real resistance. And I really believe that's true. So I think we kind of have to deal with what we have. And that is a long-term pride in having free parking on our city streets. So I looked at their proposed plan and also the 1958 ordinance that we have that allows the city council to develop, to implement residential permit parking. A couple of things really jump out at you when you do this. First of all, residential parking permits go to residents. And the purpose of residential parking permit programs are to keep non-residents from overfilling spaces on residential streets. So they're really focused in commercial areas where we have a lot of visitors coming in, where you have a lot of employees coming in, or perhaps you might even say the BART station. El Cerrito is a similar situation. You have a lot of outsiders coming into your community, parking on the streets, and then that's what a residential parking permit program is designed to address. It can't address, and it wouldn't address a project like the bowling lanes project, because those people would be residents of Albany. So any overflow parking from that project or any other development that occurs in the city, any residential development, can't be addressed. The overflow parking can't be addressed with a residential permit parking program, because those people are residents already and they have a right to park on the streets. So it's the question that's going to come forward right now from the bowling lanes project, from any future high-rise development on Solano, on San Pablo that comes out of the San Pablo specific plan. The issue is going to have to be, is there any overflow parking? And if so, how do we address it? And so I think that, and one other thing about residential permit parking programs, I think Clay pointed this out in his letter, is that you need enforcement at night if they're to be effective. If you are trying to deal, anyway, that's when, if you're dealing with residents coming from underpark projects going onto city streets, then you'd have to have the enforcement at night, because that's when those cars would be parked on the streets. And the city is not prepared. We don't have any enforcement mechanisms right now for a residential parking permit program. And if we did, would they be run at night? I don't think so. So I think Clay's comment on that was very well taken. So my belief in the end is that the challenge we have to focus on is to minimize overflow parking from new residential development near our existing so-called hotspot areas. So we know where those are from the background study that we got in 2017. We can see those on a map very simply. And they vary, they're scattered. Unfortunately, quite a few of them are along the San Pablo corridor, the streets to the east, and the streets immediately to the east, and the streets immediately to the west have some of the big hotspots. So I think our focus going forward is to minimize overflow parking. In other words, we need our future projects to be self-parked, like as the study points out, the UC Village project was self-parked because it took care of its own parking needs on its own site. And that is the alternative that I think we're going to have to be focusing on a project by project basis. And I think we should have maybe we should have some policies along that line. I don't see, I do know that residential parking permit problems are not going to work to address overflow parking from future residential permits, from future residential development. So I think, I don't know, I hope I was clear enough, and those are my thoughts at this time anyway. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Donaldson. Commissioner McLeod?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, a lot of interesting ideas here. It's such a broad topic in some ways. We've got different zones for parking. We have our single family residential zones, we have our commercial districts, and we're going to have our new higher density corridor along San Pablo. I did appreciate I do appreciate the idea of how to deal with overflow parking. And I think that's a good point. I think I come at it a little differently from a different perspective than just, provide more and more parking spaces on site for our new developments. We're entering a different era. I think climate change is a huge backdrop to what we're doing. Vehicles are 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions in Berkeley, in Albany and, the Bay Area. And I'm also concerned, about affordability with our housing projects. And, the way to deal with overflow is to look at what happens in other places where we are in transit-rich zones. And it's not just a question of providing more parking. I think there are lots of studies that show that there's induced demand for vehicle usage with parking. So just providing parking in and of itself creates more vehicle usage and creates more congestion. And by the same token, increases our greenhouse gas production, et cetera. I think what we really should be doing is providing great alternatives to car usage, to car storage. Part of this is transit, part of this is bike rooms. which we've been talking about on every project. There are many changes since 4 years ago, since the study was done. It did not anticipate the demand on San Pablo Avenue, the changes in our zoning. It did assume a static state. But I think what we really need to be doing is providing an alternative to car usage and limiting car storage on our projects. My vision of the city is is fewer cars, not more pedestrians, more bikes, walking neighborhoods, walking shopping districts. I've talked before about the 15-minute city where everything is available within 15 minutes. Albany is 1 square mile. It's perfect for this. We have a BART station within walking distance of practically the whole city, or North Berkeley BART is within walking distance of the southern edge, or biking there. I think we should be working on improving all these alternatives, which include protected bike lanes all over the city. We have also, the other part of the equation is the school district, which generates a huge amount of car trips per day. It's interesting to read the data in the 2017 report. Employees are parking on our streets, and when they do, it's 1 car per space for 8 hours or something like that. And I think that's true of the school district. They have very little on-site parking. And employees, do not generate a lot of turnover when they're parking. So whatever we can be doing to incentivize or encourage employees to be coming to work with transit or bikes would be better. When we talk about our bike requirements, I think we should be having like a requirement of 1 regular bike and 1 cargo bike per unit, and electrical charging outlets, to allow all bikes to be charged at night. I really think electric bikes are the future of urban transportation. And I see, even today, I saw more and more than I've seen before. I see parents with their kids on those bikes. I think what we really should be planning for is mode shift away from car usage, away from car storage. That's kind of my overall goal. That would be creating a much better urban environment, in my opinion. It's safer, it's healthier, can be greener, and it can actually bring more people to our local businesses than people coming by car. One thing in the 2017 report that I didn't see, they did not ask when they were doing a survey of people who came to park here by car, was how far did these people come? At least 250,000 people live within 3 to 4 miles of Solano Avenue. That is certainly a big enough demographic to support the businesses there in a bike economy, in a more pedestrian-oriented economy. Same is true for San Pablo Avenue. I think for our San Pablo specific plan, I think we should be having no minimums, no parking minimums, and I think we should actually have a 0.5 per unit parking maximum. I think it's very specific. The city of Berkeley has done something very similar. They studied parking in their housing developments it was a few years ago, and I think they found that only about 50 to 55% of the parking spaces were actually being used, where they had them, required at 1 space provided per unit, and only about half of those spaces were being used. I think we want to reduce the idea that, you just park for free everywhere you go. I think the idea of the residential parking permit system is to deal with overflow. And from that 2017 study, it looked like the average parking rate was about 60% along San Pablo, along Solano. So it didn't justify charging for parking at that point. I think, and if maybe Ann, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but do from what I read, neighborhoods have to vote to become part of the parking permit plan area? Is that true?
That's correct. We would fill out a petition that would then be evaluated by the Transportation Commission.
So it could not be something that would just be imposed by the city on the whole, on a neighborhood or on a whole.
Right, it would have to be
city.
initiated by the neighborhood and then evaluated.
Yeah, so in that sense, as we're going forward with the San Pablo specific plan and there's more development on San Pablo Avenue, then I think the neighborhoods would decide for themselves whether they would think it would be better to have reduced parking time periods on their streets, at least during the day. I understand that actually enforcing it at night is difficult in terms of expense, but I am also thinking of Berkeley, where maybe Doug Donaldson's comment about all residents have a right to park on the streets. I'm just wondering, Berkeley does not give residents of these larger housing developments street parking permits. So it becomes self-limiting in that sense that they're not allowed to park there. So I don't know if that would mean something that we'd have to rewrite our ordinance or something to specifically exempt larger units or larger developments than 10 units or something from having street permits. Regarding some of the other comments we heard about reducing the single family requirement from 2 spaces to 1, I'd be interested in exploring that. The only reason we debated is because 2 are required. If 2 weren't required, then we wouldn't have been debating it at all. So, I would be fine with looking at that. I think de facto, probably most lots are at 1 space. So it's a bit of a stretch to then require, I don't know what percentage are not, we'd be requiring it from a certain percentage, but some of the lots are obviously too small and there's no room for 2 spaces anyway. So, we're kind of at a de facto 1 space per single family lot at the moment anyway. And we've certainly been approving exemptions and reductions all over the place. It seems to take up a lot of our time talking about those things. So, and if that is in fact what our de facto decisions are all the time, then we should just make it the actual ordinance at 1 car space per house. So anyway, my overall goal is more sustainability, reduce car congestion, replace cars on our streets with bikes and active transportation and walking, etc. So thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner McLeod. Sorry, Commissioner Donaldson, did you have additional comments?
Yeah, it's good to have a discussion. This is important, and a couple of follow-on thoughts. And I think, Anne, maybe you're looking for some sort of concrete suggestions, maybe about what might happen next. And a couple of areas where I feel there's personally a data deficiency or some unknowns that we have to work with as we're looking forward to approving some big projects, multifamily projects, is we've never had a survey. We don't have good data on multifamily auto ownership or auto use. The state is saying low-income housing has a half a car per unit is the rate. They're saying that, and that's what you have to have. I really don't know what the number is. I think the bowling alley project, 540 San Pablo, is coming out at 0.75 vehicles per unit. And if we had some better, I'd like to see some better data about what the reality is sort of in Albany now with our multifamily developments, the existing development, so we can have a better idea of projecting what a realistic demand will be that we can encourage developers to fill. in other words, I'm worried about the overflow parking onto our streets. They're already congested. And we don't have a good way of, we don't have good data to sort of help us predict what that overflow parking might be. I agree with what Ian's saying or other people are saying, in that is that we need to look at different modes of parking. I believe electric bicycles really are taking off. I hear commenters tonight and everything like that talking about attacking automobiles, to get the idea, get rid of automobiles. But the other trend we're seeing is that the auto companies, the federal government and the state government want to go electric. And so their focus is on reducing the carbon dioxide emissions, not reducing the cars necessarily. And the question I have is are we going to stop using cars? Is the car ownership and car, I think in an urban place like Albany, the car user using the vehicle miles traveled, the amount we use the cars we have is going to dropping. Mine is, and I think that's probably happening with everybody. But are we getting rid of our cars? And are we having fewer cars? I was looking at the data behind the Bay Area plan, the traffic engineering studies behind the Bay Area plan that came out of ABAG. I think it's the current one. It might be the last cycle. And their projections show car ownership continuing to go up in Alameda County and in the whole Bay region. That is certainly looking, other research I've done is that is certainly an international trend, and it seems to be a national trend. Car ownership right now is going up. I don't know when it's going to start going down but I don't think it's in the immediate and foreseeable future. I think our habits are going to change, but people are still going to own cars. I mean, people were talking about how you'd have Uber and Lyft and car sharing programs that people would use and be able to get rid of their cars. But those programs have served certain segment of the population, but they don't serve families so well. And as people grow older and have families and have children to move around, they still use their cars. They use their cars and I'm skeptical about whether we're going to see any major drop in the use of cars. The other trend I've seen, and I'm worried about I was worried about some of the projections the state has, is that for some people in our society, lower income people in particular, and we're supposed to provide low income housing, affordable housing, they either they have to be transit dependent, and that's the very low income people probably are, and they go to low income jobs. But the ones above that are probably the people that provide services, the plumbers, the electricians, even the teachers. They have to drive to their jobs. Certainly the house cleaners, all of these people that provide services. So in that case, every employed person needs to have a car. Then the car becomes a necessity. And I think we're seeing that trend happening in the lower and lower middle income groups. And we certainly saw a COVID pandemic reinforces that in my mind, because those were the essential workers who had to be out there and couldn't work from home. And we need to accept that and acknowledge that. And if we're going to have a lot of affordable housing, I think the state's wrong. I think that the parking demand for affordable housing shouldn't be much lower than the parking demand for market rate housing. but well, who am I to say? I don't have the data, and I think we need to get the data. A related question, Ian talked about that the issue in Berkeley about having a lot of unused parking. And I think I've heard Nick mention that in Albany, where you can look around, you look in some of the apartment buildings, you see a lot of empty parking spaces. I'm worried about the debate we need to have about bundling versus unbundling. I think that in a community like ours, and we need some data on this. I'd love to get a parking survey of 510 Central over there in the plaza and find out how many of those, it's unbundled. I'd love to find out how many of those spaces have been sold and how many are sold. Because those people are using a great deal of parking in the plaza, and they're parking on our Albany streets as well. What's that, Evelyn there? If you have to pay $125 a month for parking, you want to think twice about doing that if you really think you can get a free parking space within 500 or even 1,000 feet. And so I'm not in favor of unbundled parking. It was pointed out to me recently that our own UC Village has bundled parking, and it works out well. And there are people there, a resident told me that, yes, there are people here that have no cars. There are 0-car households. And what they do is they rent out their spaces, and it's encouraged by UC Village. They rent out their spaces that they don't need, and to families that have 2 cars, of which there are some. I was interested in that. And I really think we should have a debate as part of hopefully as part of the San Pablo specific plan anyway. And I'd really like to see us look more closely into the implications of unbundled parking. I believe that parking survey you talked about in Berkeley, I believe they tried to count in the middle of the night, and because they had license plate information as well, how many cars parked on the street outside of the development were owned by people who lived in the development. I think there was some data in on that study, and I'd like to find out more about that. I think that's an issue, and I think that unbundled parking is a driver of the overflow parking that I'm concerned about impacting our existing streets. Enough, I've talked enough. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Donaldson. I'll just share a few of my additional thoughts on this. I'm a little more focused on the parking regulations that I think seem like a relatively small step, but I think is sort of consistent with some of the decisions that we've been making, and would help, I think, streamline things, probably minimize projects that would come across the commission agenda, but also seem to be fairly in line in the general direction that I think we seem to be going. So first up, I would certainly be supportive of changing the requirement in the planning code that requires an increase in number of parking spaces when somebody does an addition to their home. To me, this has always seemed a little bit strange that when somebody does let's call it a 500 square foot addition to their home, typical house in Albany, that triggers an additional parking space. Particularly since a lot of the projects that we're seeing, we're not necessarily seeing a dramatic increase in bedroom count, but rather we're seeing people who are making more gracious family living areas. Traditional homes in Albany have pretty tiny kitchens and living rooms and dining rooms, and contemporary standards, I think people want larger spaces. So I feel like oftentimes the result of projects are still, maybe going from a 2-bedroom to a 3-bedroom home, but most of the square footage is in common living areas or larger bedrooms and larger bathrooms or larger closets. And it's not really changing the likely sort of per capita rate of drivers per household. So I would be supportive of just establishing a standard, and I would be comfortable with a standard of 1-to-1 for single family homes. And I haven't thought too much more about in areas of town where you're allowed to build not the large multi-unit buildings, but the, duplexes or triplexes. But I think at least starting there seems very pragmatic, very reasonable, and again, pretty consistent with what the actual lay of the land is, I think, for most existing Albany homeowners who likely don't have much more realistically than one, at least off-street covered parking space. So I'd be supportive of that. I would also be supportive of changing the dimensions per sort of our discussion today, to allow for a compact size parking space to satisfy whatever our new parking requirement is. So I've often seen that being 8 feet wide by 15 feet long as sort of a compact parking space. And certainly if the parking requirement was reduced to 1-to-1 for single family homes, I'd be supportive of that one spot being 8 by 15 instead of the 8.5 by 18. I'd be supportive of allowing folks to park in the front setback. I think realistically, if you have uncovered parking towards the front of the property, I think the layman who walks by doesn't necessarily know, oh, that car is in the setback or that car is not in the setback. And I think in reality, when people have driveways at the front, they park in the front setback anyhow. So to me, again, I think that's reasonable. Certainly, I think we want to be conscientious about people not hanging over the sidewalk and obstructing the sidewalk access for folks. But I don't have as much of a concern about having folks park in that front setback, so long as we already allow people to have park in an uncovered manner towards the front of the lot anyhow. In larger buildings, I would certainly be supportive of us looking at a lower parking ratio, and I don't know what that magic number is yet. I think it would be worthwhile to dig in with a little bit more data on that. But I do think that if we do allow for reduced parking, it really has to come with a very prescriptive and I think pre-established TDM plan or transportation demand management plan that isn't just ad hoc where the developer tells us they're doing a good TDM plan. And I think we've seen that on a couple of projects where the TDM plan is really lacking in a lot of substance, but maybe as a city developing sort of a portfolio of, what constitutes a robust TDM plan and looking at whether it's, you can reduce by X amount of ratio if you provide Y amount of TDM type features. Obviously, some TDM features are more costly for the developer than others, but things along the lines of, significant number of cargo bike spaces, car share on site. Likely Albany's not going to have too many of these sides of projects, but I think things like on-site car share, and then for rental projects, especially ongoing monthly transit passes that fully cover the cost of a monthly membership. I mean, obviously things like that can, I think, really start moving the needle on people's choices. But again, I think having a really clear plan where if somebody's asking to reduce parking down to a significantly lower amount, that there are expectations about what they have to do to offset that parking, I think would be helpful. Then I guess I would just say on my last comment here, I'm not 100% sold on the parking permit issue. I agree with, I forget who it was at this point who mentioned it, but agree that, the residential parking permits, I think, are typically to discourage non-residents from parking in the area long-term. And I don't think that's the problem that we really have. I don't see this being a huge, obviously off of Solano Avenue, there's obviously the spillover, but I don't think that's really the crux of the problem that we're talking about. I think it's really the question of who has the right to park on the streets in our residential neighborhoods. And what's always a challenge for me in this is there are plenty of people who I think probably participate in the public hearings who have garages and have off-street parking, but they choose not to use it and they choose to park their vehicles on the street. And to me, I really struggle sort of the hypocrisy of telling other people they can't get a parking waiver when they themselves have parking, just choose to not use it. And so, to me, then telling people that they have to start paying to park on the city streets that we all pay taxes to support. I have a little bit of a hard time swallowing that pill. I'm not fundamentally opposed to it, but sort of based on the information that I have right now, I have some concerns about that. I would rather focus on what seems like, and we don't have to do a total 180 here on parking policy. I'm also a big proponent of sort of taking some bite-sized approaches at this and seeing what happens and seeing what sort of the reaction is and seeing what the results are over a couple years of reducing the parking requirements and not making people giving people other options and encouraging people to use square footage on their property for living rather than storing cars. If there are no cars parked on the streets, there's part of a question of what do we use our curb lines for? When our properties are already built out to that. So I personally don't have a problem with people parking on the street. And my feeling is at a certain point, people won't ask for parking reductions if they have a really hard time finding parking. I think in places that are parking constrained, you start seeing the opposite, where you start seeing people want to put in garages because they don't want to circle. And so I think the market does serve us at some level. Ultimately, if street parking becomes too difficult, people might start clearing out those old garages and using them, or putting in new parking rather than asking for parking exceptions. So I would be fine with us starting to make some sort of pragmatic tweaks around the edges of what our residential parking is, especially in our single family home neighborhoods. So those are my thoughts for this evening. Are there any concluding thoughts before we go ahead and wrap this agenda item? Oh, Commissioner McLeod.
Yeah, thank you. Those are great comments. Maybe, is there some way, Anne? I mean, I have read a whole bunch of studies, a whole bunch of articles about parking and multifamily housing and, reduced demand for car usage. Is there a way we can start sharing articles and studies like that? I think that would help inform debate, because there have been studies done on multifamily usage. There are studies on induced demand. I'd be happy to share what I have. There's a whole bunch of studies about how parking drives up costs for housing. It's expensive to build parking, and it's an opportunity cost. It takes away from the open space on sites. It takes away from retail possibilities. It takes away from more units. So, I don't think it's a simple thing. And I think parking should be unbundled as well. I think it's coercive to make people pay for parking if they don't want it or don't need it. And it makes it much more expensive per unit. So, I think there's the issue of affordable housing that's provided by developers, but parking also makes all rents go up by building it, having to build it and having it be required. So that's why cities and, cities all over the country are not having any parking minimums. So I think we need to have this sort of equity, social equity view as well. The more people that take transit, it sort of builds on itself. Less car usage means more transit use. There are lots of studies on this. So I don't know if there's some way we could share these. I'd be happy to provide some of them.
I can double check with our city attorney, but I have a recollection that articles, which obviously are not authored by members of the commission, I think are okay to forward, as long as we make them available to the public. I can double check that, but that's what I recall.
Yeah, for instance, I'd like to see the ABAG study that Commissioner Donaldson is talking about for car ownership. My take is that, if we were talking about this 10 years ago, we wouldn't have any understanding of electric bikes, car share, ride share, Uber, Lyft. So what's going to happen in 10 years? We're not planning for the past, we're planning for the future. So automated vehicles are coming. I guarantee you they're coming. And I can pretty much guarantee you that no individual is going to own an automated vehicle. That's not the way they're going to work. For me, it doesn't even make sense to buy a car right now. It makes more sense to lease a car to see what will happen in 5 years or 3 years. I think things will change. And I think by forcing us to be building more parking now in our housing developments it's a mistake. You know, I think we really want a multimodal transition. Mode shift, you know, what if we got to a 25% mode shift to bicycling? Copenhagen is at 65% mode share of cycling. And, you know, it's happening in cities all over the world that we are shifting mode. And when that happens, you're reducing congestion and you get a healthier population and a more livable city, a much more pleasant city. So I'm really, really strongly an advocate for planning for mode shift. So I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Well, with that, it looks like there are no more comments on this item from commissioners. We'll go ahead. This was just a discussion item, so we'll go ahead and close this item on our agenda. Great discussion. And that wraps our agenda this evening. So just next up, we have our next meeting in 2 weeks on the 22nd. Same time, same virtual space. And with that, we are adjourned this evening. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, good night.
Right.